In chapter 5, the Apostle Paul talks about this concept of the resurrection affecting, again, our future. Paul has this privilege of being able to see beyond just the mundane events of today, and he projects us forward. Here in Romans 5, listen as he writes here. Romans 5, and I'm going to start reading at verse 6. He says, "For when we were still without strength, in due time, Christ died for the ungodly." For scarcely for a righteous man will one die. Yet, perhaps for a good man, some would even dare to die. But God commended or demonstrated his love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. What an amazing statement. While we were still without strength, Christ died for the ungodly. Think about this. He says, some people would die for a good man, a righteous man. Some people would give up their life for good people. Maybe taking a bullet, maybe standing in the way of knocking a good man out of the way of a bus or a train. I don't know. Maybe some would give their life. That's Paul's argument. Some, and he's not saying a lot of people would do that. Not a lot. A lot of people wouldn't do that. Scarcely. There are a few people who would give their lives for good people. But then he argues, but who would give their life for sinners and ungodly people? And yet that's exactly what Christ did. Verse 8 says, "But God demonstrated his love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us." And then he argues this point. He says, "Much more then, having now been justified by his blood, we shall be saved from wrath through him." Paul uses this statement much more. He uses it 5 times in the next few paragraphs, and he's logically working his way through this idea of our connection with Jesus Christ and why it is so significant and why the resurrection settles for us, finally puts us in a place of reconciliation with God and puts us in a place where our prospects improve. He says what? Much more. If Christ died while we were sinners, there's much more for us now that we're saved. Follow his thinking. If God the Father was willing to sacrifice his Son while we were sinners, what is it that awaits us now that we are saved? See, that says what? Our prospects. Our prospects are good. He goes on. Look at verse 10. "For even when we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of his Son. Much more, having been reconciled, we shall be saved by his life." Think about this. And Paul is just elaborating more, logically working this thing through. If when we were enemies, we were hostile to God. Now, we weren't just trying to do better. We were in a place of hostility to God. We hated God. We were in a place of antipathy. As sinners, we were hostile to God. While we were hostile, Christ died for us. Wow. Wow. In fact, he says here, while we were enemies, we were reconciled. The word reconciled there, that Greek word, is the word where we get our word catalyst. catalyst. What is a catalyst? A catalyst is something that causes some reactions to take place. What is the catalyst that caused the Father to, instead of look at us as hostile enemies, what is the catalyst that causes him now to look at us as sons and daughters? Well, it's the death of his son. It's Christ's death that reconciled us to God. Now, if his death reconciled us while we were enemies, Paul says, how much more should we get now that we're saved by his life? In other words, if God blessed us while we were enemies, what awaits us now that we're his children? I say to you, the resurrection augments the believer's prospects. He does this again. He argues again. Look at chapter 5 and look at verse 15. Look at 14. Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over those who had not sinned according to the likeness of the transgression of Adam. Paul says death reigned from Adam to Moses, even though people didn't sin like Adam did. Death reigned. Death continues to reign because people die. All sin, therefore all die. What? Death reigns. And yet, listen to Paul's thinking. He says, verse 15, but the free gift is not like the offense. For if by one man's offense many died, much more, through the grace of God and the gift by grace, the one man, Jesus Christ, abounds to many. While we were sinners, Christ died, and if one man's offense, that is Adam, if one man can cause all to die, Paul argues, much more the grace of God and the gift by grace through Jesus Christ can abound to many. Great thinking, great thinking. That if sin can do all that damage, how much more can God accomplish through Jesus Christ now that we live? Much more. It's just much more. If he can do that while we're enemies, what in the world awaits us? What are our prospects looking forward? He adds another one. Look at this one. In verse 16, he says, and the gift is not like that which came through the one man who sinned. For the judgment which came from one offense resulted in the condemnation of many. But the free gift which came from many offenses resulted in justification. That is, Christ's death, that free gift that God gave to us, that free gift results in the justification of many. One sinner produces many sinners. One God-man in his death can justify many sinners. That's his argument. Look at verse 17. For if by the one man's offense death reigned through the one, death reigned through Adam. All die because all are in Adam. What a contrast. All die. Every one of us have a due date. Every one of us has a death date. Death reigned in Adam. But look at what God does in Jesus Christ.